Hey, today I'm going to talk about what's the value of a KrisFlyer Mile because I think this is a very important conversation to have if you're someone who's currently collecting miles or if you're someone who's a cashback user and you're wondering whether or not miles are actually worth it for you to switch from cashback to miles. My personal observation is that people who chase miles tend to overvalue the value of each mile, whereas people who chase only cashback tend to underestimate the value that miles can bring them. So I think by knowing how to calculate the true value of miles, you can then make a more informed decision whether or not you should continue chasing miles or cashback or maybe a combination of both. For this video, I'm only going to focus on KrisFlyer Miles because it is the most common frequent flyer program in Singapore. Every mile card in Singapore lets you convert their points to KrisFlyer Miles, while other airlines tend to partner only with select banks, so it's a much harder task to collect points and miles for those frequent flyer program. So I think for the sake of simplicity, let's take a look at KrisFlyer first. So by the end of this video, I hope that we can answer 3 questions. 1, how do we find out the value of each KrisFlyer mile? And number 2, should I pay the annual fee of my credit card to earn the miles? And number 3, are miles only good to use for business class or first class tickets? To ascertain the value of miles, let's look at how 3 different parties value each KrisFlyer mile, and then from there we can gauge what is a good price to put to each KrisFlyer mile. One of the most major players in the game of miles will be banks and credit card companies because they offer cards that earn you miles and points that you can then use as KrisFlyer miles to book your next flight. So how do banks value their miles? To look at how much banks value miles, we can look at how much they sell you the miles for. When you pay your annual fee for cards like City Premier Miles, DBS Altitude, OCBC 90N, you are charged $180 plus GST, which comes to about $190 for 10,000 miles, which a bank will credit you upon you paying your annual fee. That means that each mile now costs you about 1.92 cents thereabouts. And therefore, banks have no qualms at selling you each mile at that amount. Meaning to say, you can roughly know that each mile will never exceed this value because the banks are happy enough to sell you at this rate. Now, there are people who will gladly pay the annual fee to get these 10,000 miles every year, and we'll see whether it's a good idea or not later in this video. But the fact remains that many people actually do not want to pay this amount because it's quite pricey. 1.92 cents per mile is actually quite a high price to pay for each mile, especially when you can get your miles at other places for cheaper. So we can see that banks actually value their miles at about 1.92 when they are selling it to you. Now, banks actually buy back miles from you too, although at a very lousy rate. For instance, DBS actually buys back each DBS point from you at 1 cent each. And since each DBS point is worth 2 miles, it means that they are offering 0.5 cents per mile to buy back from you in form of cash rebates. So essentially, you take your DBS points and then you convert it for cash rebates. And that's how banks buy back miles from you. Other cards like OCBC 90N, they are a little bit more generous. They actually buy back each mile from you at 1 cent each. But typically, most banks will happily buy back the miles from you at about 0.5 to 0.6 cents each. Now, this means that each mile has a minimum worth of 0.5 cents because the bank is happy to take it back from you at that rate. So if you are faced with a choice of, let's say, a 4 miles per dollar card and a 1.5% cashback card, by choosing the 1.5 cashback because you think that you don't need the miles, you're actually taking a lower cashback rate because 4 miles per dollar can get you 2% cashback. Now, 0.5 cents per mile, as I mentioned, is a horrible rate. So don't take that as the value of each mile, but as you can see, that's the minimum value that each mile is at. So as you can see, banks actually value each mile at 0.5 cents to about 1 cent for the more generous banks when they are buying it from you. And when they are selling it to you, they value it around 1.92 cents. Now, the next major player in the game of miles will obviously be Singapore Airlines because we're talking about KrisFlyer Miles after all. So how much do they value their miles? If you look at how much they are selling each economy flight to Bangkok, it costs about $300 to $400, right? This redemption in miles will cost 27,000 miles and you have to pay the tax of about $85. So if you take the ticket price at $400 and I minus off $85 of taxes, $315 is the price I avoid paying when I use $27,000 miles to book my flight. If you take $315 divided by 27,000 miles, the value is actually 1.16 cents per mile. And that is assuming that I was going to buy the Singapore airline ticket for that price, but now I'm using my miles to book the flight instead. Now I can really hear the miles people saying, why are you looking at economy class when you're talking about miles? And why are you looking at a nearby destination like Bangkok? Alright, so let's take a look at a further destination, San Francisco, and in business class. This redemption will take 214,000 miles and we have to pay tax of about $100. Now, this ticket is being sold by Singapore Airlines for over $7,000. So if you take $7,000 minus off $100 of tax and you divide by 214,000 of miles, you actually get a fantastic value for each mile that you redeem. Each mile of yours is now 3.37 cents. And that of course sounds like a better deal than redeeming on economy. And that's why some people feel that miles are really worth it because they get 3 cents per mile and therefore a 4 mile per dollar card is actually 12% rebate to them. But is that really the truth? Let's find out more. Now the final and perhaps most important player in the game of miles to ascertain the value of each mile would be you. Because if you're someone who values business class tickets at a very high premium and you are already paying $6,000-$7,000 for your business class flights, then your miles are actually worth the 3 cents plus that Singapore Air values it at. However, if you're someone who's unwilling to pay the high ticket price for business class flights, your miles are actually not worth that much, unlike what some people might think. Just because a company tells you that something is worth $6,000 does not mean that this thing is worth $6,000 to everybody. Let me give you an illustration. Now let's imagine if Singapore Airlines release a new product called Royal Class and you're seated next to none other than their CEO on a short trip to Bangkok and they price it at $10,000 but it only costs you 100,000 of your miles. Now each of your miles is now worth 10 cents each. Such a great deal, right? Now to be fair, I think there'll be many Singapore Airlines fans who will jump at the chance of paying $10,000 to take a flight with the Singapore Airlines CEO, and therefore 100,000 miles is really worth it for them because they offset the $10,000 that they were going to pay anyway. But if you ask someone like me, I'll be, firstly, who the hell is Singapore Airlines CEO? And secondly, why would I want to pay $10,000 or 100,000 miles to take a flight with him to nearby Bangkok? Now, it's an extreme example for sure, but if you pose a similar question to someone and ask them, would you pay $7,000 to take business class from Singapore to San Francisco? I'm sure many people will say no. And if the answer is no, then their miles was never worth 3 over cents per mile to begin with. So the real way to value miles would be this. If you're willing to pay only $2,000 for the business class ticket to San Francisco, then you should take that $2,000 and divide it across that 200 over 1,000 miles that you pay and derive the value per mile that you realistically get from your miles. So the value of miles is highly subjective. So if you ask what's my personal valuation of miles, I will show you this table. For a flight to Bangkok on economy, I'm at most willing to pay $250 for a Singapore airline flight because budget airlines you can easily get, I think, around $200. So the $50 I would say is a premium for the Singapore Airlines brand, right? After all, it's just a 2-hour flight, right? So I don't really need something very good. And that puts the value of miles at 0.61 cents because I still need to factor in that I still need to pay tax when I use my miles. For a business class flight to Bangkok, at most I would pay $400, and even then I feel it's a bit much because again, it's a very short flight. So do I really need to pay more for a business class flight? And given the taxes and the number of miles to pay, each mile is now worth only about 0.65 cents. So these redemptions actually do not make much sense. Now for an economy flight to San Francisco, at most I'll be willing to pay I think about $1,500. And given the taxes and $84,000 miles I have to pay, this means that each mile is actually worth a pretty decent 1.67 cents per mile, which I think is alright redemption in my book. And for business class, I think at most I will pay about $500 to $700 more in premium over the economy class ticket. And therefore, if I were to really calculate the value of the miles, each mile is only about 98 cents. And that is a fair value, I guess. And that's because I really don't value business class flights that much at this moment. So if I were to average out, I think each KrisFlyer Mile is worth about 1 to maybe 1.3 cents each. and I would definitely not pay more than 1.3 cents per mile. But if you were to sell me miles at below 1 cent each, I would definitely buy as many as you're willing to sell. And that's possible right now with some promotions that happen from time to time. At the time of filming, there is a city payout promo that actually lets you buy miles at 0.8 cents each. So I would definitely try to max that out where possible. So in short, you have to ask yourself, how much are you willing to pay for a particular ticket to somewhere, and then divide it across the number of miles it will cost you to go to that destination. Because if you're unwilling to pay a certain amount, but you pay for it in miles, remember, it's just a different currency. You end up just spending more than you intended to because of some clever manipulation by banks and Singapore Air. Also, let's not forget that redeeming miles is actually not as straightforward as using cash to pay for your flight. On any airline, right? For Singapore Airlines, to book a flight using miles, you have to first find availability, and then you have to often wait list and then wait for it to be confirmed, etc. So it's not as convenient as just going to SQ, take my money, booking a flight and getting your ticket confirmed immediately. In fact, miles are often used to offload unwanted seats that they cannot sell to cash-paying passengers, and therefore your selection is always going to be far more limited than people who are paying cash for their airline ticket. And this has to affect the value of miles too. I think you can take away 5 to 10% off the value of miles this way. So to sum it up, here are the 3 questions that we want to answer. 1. What is the value of each KrisFlyer Mile? The answer will depend heavily on whether or not you're willing to pay for expensive flights to begin with. If you're someone who is willing to pay the ticket price for business flights, then each KrisFlyer Mile is easily worth 3 cents. If you're someone who rather pay for budget or economy flights, then your the value per mile will be about 1 cent each. Question 2, whether or not you should pay the annual fee to get the miles given by your credit card will highly depend on your answer to question 1. Because if you value miles at 3 cents each, then definitely you should pay the annual fee, get your 10,000 miles for $192 because that's still lower than the value you get from those miles. But if you're someone who's only willing to pay for budget or economy flights, then 1.92 cents per mile is extremely high price to pay, and I will avoid that as far as possible. So number 3, is business class the only worthy redemption? I actually beg to differ. It's a oft-repeated myth that it is the most valuable redemption. But if you're someone who will never pay for business class ticket, using your miles for economy actually makes sense. As you can see from the table of my personal evaluation, an economy flight to San Francisco actually gives me more value for my miles than a business class flight would. Right, so myth busted. I hope my arguments were convincing enough. If you like my video, please remember to drop me a like, subscribe to my Telegram group, and I'll see you next video.